Siblings and sisters and brothers in Christ, welcome to Tuesdays for Nurture. This is a webinar series where we faithfully focus on education for the people of God, and it includes all sorts of things like faith-filled politics to interviews of key leaders to congregational how-tos in congregational life and the impacts of current realities on the church that we lead. And all of this will be featured. And every webinar has clear suggestions about what you can do to change the church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. So today is an incredible offering brought to you by these wisdom leaders of the younger members of the United Church of Christ. This is talking about shifting focus about youth ministry in 2020 and beyond. And we are delighted to be joined by Reverend Leea Ellen, and they are the minister at Virginia Highlands UCC of Faith and Justice in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Leea.
Hi, so glad to be here with you, Chris, and with my fellow panelists and with the UCC broader church family.
We are also joined by Reverend Jill Olds, who is a local UCC pastor at the Congregational Church of Naugatuck, Connecticut, and the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Program. Welcome, Jill.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you all. Looking forward to some good conversation.
And we are joined by Reverend Todd Atkins-Whitley, a second career pastor, a grandfather, and he is serving as the Minister for Youth and Families at Danville Congregational Church in California. Welcome, Todd.
Hey, y'all. Glad to be here. Actually on vacation and at home in Texas. So really good to be able to join with everyone today.
And finally, my esteemed colleague, Reverend Trayce Potter, who's the Minister for Youth and Young Adults, the mother to one amazing boy, and really, I am honored to be on the same team here on Faith Info with Trayce. Welcome, Trayce.
Thank you, Chris, and everyone. I'm really excited for this.
So as we are gathering ourselves together, we're going to be having some conversation throughout, as we go through conversation, if you have questions for us here in the live conversation, you can put them in the Q&A, which is below this window, probably about here for you. And I'll repeat those questions verbally if you're watching us in the recording so that folks know what we're talking through. And we're going to engage some of those throughout the course of our conversation. But in the meantime, y'all, what a year. What a year. So I'm just going to start by asking all of you who are carrying and ministering to youth in the United Church of Christ, like, how are you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, this year has definitely been something that has challenged us. Seminary did not prepare us for this world. And we're all having to adapt and do the best that we can. Not only taking care of those that we serve, but self-care is so important. So, managing, I have the support of my wonderful team. The UCC is amazing. So I think I really am doing okay these days.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Amen to the no course on this in seminary. And yet I really have felt like I've been given what I need. Someone wisely shared with me the words of a pastor who was serving a congregation after the Sandy Hook massacre. And this pastor shared his experience with what he went through being a pastor in a time like that, and gave some advice about this is time to dig in and lean into your spiritual resources and your community and practice self-care. But this is your time. This is your time to be called. And I've really tried to operate within that and lean into the resources of our community, my co-pastor, our families, and do. I had no idea whatsoever that we would be pastoring not only in a pandemic, but as the virus, the epidemic of racism has overflowed. Here we are, called into just such a moment. So I feel very blessed and sustained at this moment. So.
Yeah, echoing some of what my colleagues have said, this is a year for the record books. And I started at my new congregation on March 16th. So the idea of healthy entry in the midst of COVID hitting, this really is not textbook. There's no book, there's no rule book, there's no roadmap for this. So a lot of us have been figuring it out as we go. And it's an interesting time in that I think we're all, as a culture, going through a collective time of deep grief in so many different ways. And at the same time, those of you who are intimately acquainted with grief know that we don't experience grief in the same way and that we don't respond to it in the same way. And I think that's been true of our youth. I think that's true of our youth workers and of our adults as well. Staying connected to each other in this time can be really helpful. You know, I'm doing okay, and it's been a full season, a lot of learning going on, and a lot of tending to one's spirit as much as we can with the restrictions that are around us these days.
So for me, about 9 months into ministry here, and this is second career for me too, Todd, but 9 months into my role here, and I think this is such a prophetic time to be in ministry of any kind, particularly youth ministry, as well as non-traditional forms of ministry. The church is broken open. So many of our buildings have closed, but the sanctuary has expanded beyond our wildest imaginations, and the potential to reach people in new ways is there, and we're not going back. And I think that's a good thing for the people of God. It's certainly been a trying year for me. My partner lost her mother to COVID-19 early in the year. My grandmother was diagnosed with COVID-19 twice in a nursing home, is recovering, is still with us. And so, and then there's the other losses that come, you know, in terms of what Jill mentioned. We're in pandemics, multiple. So we're having civil unrest and uprisings around white supremacy. We're also suffering with the other losses that come, people that pass away from cancer or old age or suicide. There's a lot happening in the life of our church and with the people that we are ministering to. And for me, it is definitely a time of tapping into spiritual practices. And if I don't have them down, I'm trying my best to fine tune them, certainly for whatever is to come.
You know, we started this conversation thinking about self-care and through the lens of how are you, because, you know, for those of us in the work of ministry, whether we are ordained or professional or called or volunteering, the only tool that we have to do this work is our own selves. We are God's hands, we are God's feet, we are God in this world, bringing about the liberating message of gospel. So, you know, in thinking that through, why it, like, two questions related, you know, how is that so important for you? How are you attending to your own self-care? And what would you offer to someone struggling in self-care right now, recognizing that so many people are? Yes.
Yeah, for me, it's you know, when we were in the period of flying and traveling frequently, you always heard during the announcements to make sure that you put your mask on first before you try to save someone else. And I think that in the church and in ministry, we oftentimes forget that. We are sometimes the lifeline to people's faith. And we feel that we have to be on call. We have to do so many things. But the reality is, if we get sick or go down or are unavailable, the work has to continue. You know, for me, I'm a mom. So I love my job. I love the calling that I have. But if I'm not taking care of myself, then that affects other areas as well. And at 3 years old, there's not a whole lot my son can do for himself. So my invitation is to really rediscover what you love. Being home during this COVID crisis has helped me to reconnect with just the simple things of doing walks, focusing on my own physical health. So I think that we are primed to find out what feeds our soul, and then to chase after those things, because we need joy in the midst of this season.
Yeah, that's something that I would like to piggyback on a little bit, Tracy. I think that is, there's such a deep need there for us to tend to our own spirits. And I really appreciate your invitation, because when we are in the wilderness, my church has been hearing a lot about that lately. We've been preaching on Exodus. And when we are lost in the wilderness, there is a deep invitation for doing things in a different way. And as Leea commented before, we are not going to be able to go back to the way things were. So this manifests as, okay, what is the deepest need within my own spirit right now? And how can I fill that such that I am not completely empty when I try to do ministry? Ministry is intended to be an overflow of our spirit. And if we're trying to pour water out of an empty cup, that's not going to work. It's intended to literally flow over the edges so that we can continue to do the work to which we are called and the work that God equips us to do. But we can't do that when we're running on empty. So finding the creative different ways, and you all are youth ministers. This is kind of your bread and butter, right? Like, this is what those of us who have done youth ministry for a while know how to do. It's, okay, this isn't working, we're going to pivot, we're going to try something else, we're going to just kind of do different things to see what works in our community. And the dirty secret is that what works for us first will then work for others. Yeah.
So Reverend Tracy just said something that spoke to me, because it came last night as I was thinking about our now ancestors, Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, who said, you must do the work your soul must have. And I started to ask myself, am I doing my work? And usually when I think about that, I'm thinking about, kind of the struggle and the striving that comes with trying to exert myself in whatever capacity it is that I'm called to fill. But now for me, that question means something deeper, as someone alluded to in the chat, about actually going after what's going to fill me up. And so it's been really important for me to find new ways of connecting with the divine, which usually means going internally and introspective mode and meditating, but also connecting with the divine in people who in my short few months here before the pandemic, who I didn't get to connect with before, reaching out and finding new ways of being in relationship with people, because I think that that is what is going to carry us through this pandemic. We have to get real about relationships with God, with ourselves, and certainly with one another. And so I'm grateful for spaces like this to connect with fellow UCC clergy and lay folks and people who are doing the work that their soul must have.
There's so much truth in that. If we are doing this right, then this webinar and this conversation is going to be something that offers resources, it offers support, and assures you who are watching, whether with us now or in the recording, that you are not alone in this. That you are not alone in this. Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my own experience, and Reverend Eric Sherlock is a senior pastor at our church, and he may show up in the amen section here in a second when I make this confession. But being a person of a particular age called into ministry at a particular time, I feel like this tremendous urgency to work, and he will attest that, I mean, I just throw myself into it, and like we all have, and just get bleary-eyed, and this is it. And to perhaps the detriment of my relationship or my relationships. And so for me, it's been important to, and I'm grateful for friends along the way who, for me to connect outside of well, it's not really outside of the church, but a different setting with friends, with the Oakland and San Francisco queer community, and go to the beach and go to the woods and do things like I've heard that take me away from this, which is super important, and feed my spirit. And another thing that happened in the spring, a group of other folks who companion teenagers and their families got together on a Zoom, and we talked and it was a simple thing, but us getting together, and like you said, we're not alone in this, and we are struggling. That was actually a kind of a turning point moment to realize I'm not in this vacuum. We're all doing this, and they had ideas and encouragement, and to keep that line of communication has been really important for me.
So that's, I mean, there's a reason why we started with the self, is because we have to be, well, first of all, youth know, like, if you're not okay, that's going to be really clear really quick. And secondly, in order to offer the resources to churches, and I know that you are waiting to hear some of that, we have to be grounded in our own self, grounded in our communities, grounded in God, to do this with intentionality and covenant and care. So I want to shift conversation a little bit this really has been such a hard year, and youth ministry in its own thing is complicated because you have, certain areas of the, everybody's doing what they need to do in conversation with their context. And we trust that that is true. And there are certain areas of the country that are hotspots and there's no gathering at all, or there is gathering and then there's implications of that gathering. And then there's how do we make these decisions, which we've had lots of conversation about throughout the course of these things. And then it's like, well, then what do we do if we don't gather? So, in thinking through that, I'm going to turn to Leea and think, based on what you've seen in your context, what do our youth really need right now? And what has that looked like for you?
Yeah, they need connection, and they need me to be real about what's going on. So I had from mid-December to mid-March to get to know some of the youth here at Virginia Highland Church. We have a really small demographic of youth and children. And immediately when the pandemic started, I realized that I wasn't even going to be able to get to know them the way I wanted to, because that in-person, face-to-face contact and connection, even like a hug, even just being able to wave at someone and they're in the physical proximity that you are, that was really a shock to my system and to the work that I had planned to do. And so right now what I'm seeing is, and hearing from teens and from young people, is certainly a need to talk about what's happening in the world. They don't want to ignore that. As a matter of fact, part of my role is bringing in how we talk about justice in light of our faith and helping them understand that they are creating and developing theology when they have conversations about the textbooks that they're using in their classroom. And what does that mean in light of racism and the context of white supremacy, when they are talking with their friends about, what happened down here in Georgia in Irwin Detention Center with forced sterilization of immigrant women. We're having these types of conversations, and we were able to use the programming that you and Reverend Trayce so eloquently put together around race, around white privilege, and be able to bring that into our conversation. We've been talking about the connections between our history, our faith, what we say we believe, as well as what that means in the context of colonialism, right? So really having thoughtful conversations about what's happening right now is helping teens to know. And then I bring in my own stories and experiences. It's really important, I think, that youth hear from us and our stories and experiences. Sometimes I feel like, well, they won't be able to connect to that, but they are on pins and needles ready to listen to what it is we have to say in this moment, because as we have these conversations, their faith is being formed and shapen. I think we also have to as we're doing this, in the capacity for me, again, I'm talking about dealing with a smaller group of young people, we have to be clear and graceful about the expectations that we have of ourselves and what we're actually able to do. And so for me, that connection is so important. You know, right now I'm connecting outside of text messages. I'm able to connect with my youth about once a month, because that's about as much as I can get from their commitments, their parents and families' commitments, and everything else they have going on in their lives. But that once a month connection in a group setting is really giving life to them and to me. And it's teaching me that is what my expectation should be, is that we have authentic community and communion with one another. And I think that's what's keeping them engaged, and that's what keeps them coming back. You know, I if I were them, I imagine they're kind of like, not another Zoom meeting, because a lot of them are doing this already online. But just having expectations that are really realistic is going to help us move through this moment. We cannot reproduce and recreate what we were able to recreate in our physical sanctuaries or whatever context you do ministry in. We're not able to reproduce that, and we shouldn't be trying to. We shouldn't be trying to. We should lean on one another to create new ways of learning and being and doing church.
That is a word right there. If we're trying to replicate what worked, I mean, oftentimes youth ministry experiences are replications of ones that worked a few generations ago. And we've been moving in that way towards something different for a long time. And even more so in this era. So I want to say that part out loud, and offer the same question to Todd. In your context, what do youth really need right now, and what does that look like?
1,000% amen to Pastor Leea. Can we talk after this and just, you know, check in? I love everything that you're having to say.
About that, we're going to have some opportunities for connection towards the end of this conversation.
There we go. Perfect. So yeah, the connection, you know, referencing briefly back to self-care, they need to know that I'm not always all right either, that I'm struggling, and maybe how I'm dealing with things, and that I'm not, because I'm their pastor, that I've got it all figured out. I feel like they also need to be reminded of their own inner resilience and be encouraged. And so for us, we've initially, you know, maintained their youth group hour 5 to 7 on Sunday nights through Zoom, shortening it, of course. And now what we found out is they really need to be together. And so we are innovating out in California, where, as most of you know, we're pretty shut down still, but we are gathering in small groups, physically distant. And, you know, you would think possibly that reminding them about masks and staying apart, and that would be a thing. It's not a thing. They're so hungry for the time that they can get together, unstructured time, silly time, and of course some Pastor T talks get worked in there. They need that. I've also the issue of mental health with our young people. You know, that's a touchy subject, and we gotta shift that narrative that it's okay to talk about that in context with our spirituality and our bodies. That I think our parents and our families need that extra support. The young people need to be with other trusted adults, like their pastors or their youth advisors, to be around them. And I've also started, you know, and offering to, hey, I'll meet you at the whatever shop you like to get a drink at, where we can sit outside and hang out and just talk, just trying to figure out, like Reverend Leea said, what are the ways. Those are things we could have been doing, but these are things they really that I'm discovering that they need right now. And just like Reverend Leea said, they need real talk. They know what's going on. They're aware of it. They see it in their schools. They're catching the news, and we can't shy away from facing these conversations. And so, related to that, for me personally, it has been, we need to be talking about the same things with the rest of the church. We need to be talking about the same things about white supremacy and our privilege and what's going on at our borders. We need to be talking about that with the whole church, so that it's not just being done with them. And I think they feel respected, they feel seen, and they're eager for opportunities to practice this ongoing faith formation that we're actually all in the process of. So that out of nowhere, one of our 8th graders reaches out to me and says, I have a lot of clothes, and probably other kids do. Do you think the church could do? And she did this clothing drive, and then her mom helped her out, and she went and dropped them off at a place that provides these clothes to some of the unaccompanied minors in a community where a lot of folks are located. And that was a transformative experience born out of the space that we've held together and the things that we've talked about, in her own curiosity and her own heart and her own passion. And I think even though we're, again, especially in California, we're really locked down, we've got to innovate and provide them opportunities to not only gain opportunities for formation, but to have opportunities to practice.
So just another note, I couldn't type fast enough in the chat. I really am wondering, for those of you who are joining us, if this is coming up for you around mental health. So at the same time that I'm doing these youth meetings where we're talking about the Bible and justice, in this current moment, I'm also running a weekly small group with parents called Parenting in a Pandemic. And this came up, and it was really eye-opening for the other parents in the group around the emotional wellness and the mental health of their kids. And so there are young folks who may not be showing some of the signs that we're used to seeing as adults, but they're like pseudo depressed because they're not getting time to socialize in the ways that they're used to with their friends, with folks at church. I heard one parent say that, just telling their child, like, no, their youngest teenager, no, I've got meetings, I got to get to this, really caused that teenager to insulate, and to be very kind of heartbroken. And he's deaf. So there's so many layers to what that looks like for him. And it really opened this parent's eyes. I had another parent who said that their child was experiencing anxiety because they were attempting to do some socially distanced gatherings and things like that and outings. And it actually caused more stress on the teenager. And so processing that, there's a lot happening in the world, but we can't lose sight that we are still in a pandemic, and that this is impacting the social, obviously the physical health, but the social and mental and emotional and spiritual health of young people. So I'm just wondering for others, and I would love to gauge in some people in the chat as we continue, how that's coming up, if it's coming up, what are ways that you're seeking to manage that. Thankfully, I co-facilitate. I have no children of my own. I co-facilitate that small group with a parent who's also a teacher, and we're able to bring in some resources. And then when there are things that I think are really beyond my scope, I'm very quick to say, hey, I can recommend a licensed therapist and get those things kind of going, because we are going to need those things long-term to really sustain our young people.
So I want to shift a little bit from this conversation to some of the specific programming that is available or you have offered in these contexts. So Jill, I know that you run you run a program assembling all sorts of wisdom about this. So I'm going to invite you to speak to that before Tracey hops in with some of the specific programming she knows of.
Yeah, I'm happy and honored to speak to that. Oh my goodness. I mean, the things that Reverend Leea and Reverend Todd just raised bring up a lot of questions around what I would term very loosely and sort of in the big umbrella picture, the ministry of presence. What does it mean to be present to our youth in this time? What does it mean to be present virtually? What does it mean to be present to all of the mental health struggles that our young people are experiencing, which were, I think, around before the pandemic, and I saw a couple of comments in the chat to that effect, but really have risen to the surface for many people and are new for others. And want to echo what Reverend Leea said about having some therapists. All of us pastors in the field should have at our fingertips a whole bunch of folks we can refer our people to, because while we probably have some training in this, most of us are not experts in that field. So knowing who is and being able to go in that direction can be really useful. But yeah, so in my work at the Youth Ministry Institute at Yale, we have put out some pretty good curricula around a couple of key things that we're finding to be really helpful around the ministry of presence and what that looks like for right now. So one of the things we've done is really honed in on mental health. And from the perspective that Reverend Todd raised earlier, which was that youth are actually really resilient. They have a lot of inner gifts and inner strength that they don't even know how to tap into yet. So having some ways that we can build that up for those who, my belief is they already have it, it's innate, but finding ways to bring that to the fore in this time when it's so needed. We have some resources on that. We also have some resources on mental health for those of you who are working with youth directly to be aware of sort of the things that you might see and think, what does this mean? What can I do about that? What am I seeing here? You know, I had a youth who in my church who was very involved for a long period of time, but with COVID really sort of receded. You know, what is that about? What does that look like? What can ministry to that person look like? What are we seeing, right? That's the general question. And then, you know, to echo what some of the other panelists have said, there are many pandemics going on. I believe Reverend Leea raised that. One of the big pandemics, as we all know, is the conversations around racial injustice in this country and how horrific this is, how horrific it has always been, but how in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, we have seen that rise to the surface of our collective conscience yet again. And what can we do with that? So at YMI, we've been doing a lot of work around anti-racism training. And it mirrors how we started this time, which is we really need to focus on us first. You know, I need to come to terms with how I experience racism as a straight, white, cis woman in this country and how it is ingrained in my DNA and how it is in our culture's DNA, how I respond to that truth, that very real truth. Youth workers need to do a lot of that work themselves before you can bring it to your youth group. That's hugely important. So we have some tools for that, and would be happy that those are all available for free on our website. It's in the chat, and would be happy to discuss those things a bit more. But you know, there really are a lot of pandemics going on. The pandemic of COVID-19, the pandemic of mental health, the pandemic of racism and racial injustice. So many others, but yeah, you know, being thoughtful about programming around these things is really important. But underneath all of it is meeting the youth where they are. It's that piece of presence. So if your youth are accustomed to a weekly gathering and that works for them and that works for them over Zoom, that's great. If your youth are totally zoomed out, we need to get creative. And there are other options. We have those on our website too, but we can talk more about that. But you know, there are other ways that we can be with these youth, but being very intentional about asking them what they need. You know, where are you in all of this? I think we as adults, and I don't think we mean to do this, but I think there's a tendency for us to go into a youth program and think that I have all the resources, I have all the answers, here's what you all need. When in reality, we should go in with the question of what would be helpful for you right now. You don't want to lead youth to have a conversation about mental health when in reality, they really want to be serving a meal down the street and working with homeless folks. You know, those are two different things. Youth need both, of course, but where are they right now? How can we walk with them and accompany them right where they are? So being thoughtful about that can be hugely important. I hope some of that's helpful.
Oh gosh, I had something that was to Trayce.
Yeah, so there's been a lot that's been said, and one of the things that I want to again echo is that youth ministers are having to find themselves as being parents in a lot of ways right now. I've heard the stories of parents that are, struggling themselves because of everything that's going on. And the reality is that a lot of times teachers were the first line of defense for things. They were the ones that were seeing signs of abuse. They were recognizing a lot of the things that our youth needed. And now, because we've been forced into these virtual spaces, I think that it's really important to equip our youth ministers to see things in a brand new way, because you now have to be that line of defense. You have to be able to intervene where necessary. And like Jill said, we can't do it all. So knowing who you can call upon to help. And one of the things that we've been intentional about at the national setting is to continue to offer programming and events that speak to the needs of youth ministry, but also those that are doing it. So most of you are aware that we had to do a very quick shift and pivot for National Youth Event. And with all of the challenges, it really brought new opportunities. So one of the things that we were able to put together was this incredible resource that is available for download through UCC resources that actually helps our youth begin to think about service projects in new ways. So I know that one is focused around seeing yourself in a larger story. So whether that's understanding yourself through the lens of immigration or racism, or just where are you in what's happening? So I definitely want to lift that up as an opportunity. Yeah, I'll leave it right there.
I want to say a couple of things regarding this. The first is that if you're watching the recording and you are like, where are all of these resources? They are below the YouTube in the description, and all of these links will be right there and you can access them. They're also going to be sent out in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered for this conversation. So you're going to have that information there. And I want to lift up a question that came in the Q&A about how all of this works and ministering digitally to those, what that looks like with kiddos, especially those who have disabilities and when they can't be here in person. So how has that worked for you in your contexts? Or what have you figured out? Go ahead.
Oh, this is such a good question. So I'm a mom, I have 2 boys, and my older son has differing abilities. He has high functioning autism and ADHD. And seeing him struggle through, we're in a hybrid model for our school system, right? So seeing him struggle through what the remote learning piece looks like, it's daunting. He does okay, but so many don't. And there are days, right? There are always days. So, if you are in a place that is strictly remote, where you are in a hotspot for COVID, where you cannot do anything in person, the parents are the first line of defense for you to be able to reach out to the parents and say, what unique ways would it be possible to reach your child? There are some folks with differing abilities who have very tactile, who are very sensory inclined with touch. So being able to, instead of trying to connect with them on Zoom where they're just totally unable to do that, maybe sending something to their home that is especially meaningful to them. Some young people are really tuned into certain textures, even beyond the conversation about being sensory in terms of touch. So what texture is especially meaningful? That's getting really granular, but it's one example of things that can work. There are a lot of different categories for differing abilities, but being very thoughtful around what works for each individual. This is one of those hard places where a general program is not going to solve all of those questions. But again, we're getting back to that ministry of presence piece, where what can we do to reach this particular individual? And this isn't going to have an easy answer, unfortunately. There are some youth who absolutely cannot engage in this kind of conversation online, and that's real. And there's a loss there. We lose a lot by not being in person. We lose a lot by not being able to have that face-to-face, to have that connection, to be able to do more things. So there is, and that's real. We should sit with that. We should sit with that loss. At the same time, looking towards what are the opportunities here? Is this a child with differing abilities who's really connected with the 85-year-old who attends church on a given Sunday, and maybe asking that 85-year-old to give that kiddo a call. There are different ways that we can do this, but I want to name the challenge that this is not the easiest thing to do.
And in the midst of all of those challenges, I will offer the encouragement to do so with intentionality towards safe church policies, and in conversation with the insurance board, as is appropriate. So we can't talk about youth ministry without also talking about safe church policies. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I want to jump in again on that for just a quick second. So on our website, we've done a lot around what safe church or church safety policies in general beyond the UCC can look like. So certainly if you are through the insurance board, be in touch with them around what makes sense and what is an okay choice. And we came up with sort of a best practices one pager that you folks are welcome to look at on our website as well. But yeah, thank you, Chris, for raising that. That's a really important thing as we talk about one-on-one possible connections and how that jives or doesn't jive with your own individual church's safe conduct policy guidelines.
Oh, there's so much. Go ahead, Leah.
So I want to say something to Reverend Jill's point about accessibility, because when the pandemic started, this was probably the thing that was top of mind for me, and realizing that VHC is striving to be truly accessible to all. So when we say all are welcome, we make space and room for you to be welcome for real, and mean that. And there are several young folks in the congregation who have physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. And so for some, like one of the teenagers who's on the autism spectrum, I'm not able to connect with him in a youth group setting because I wouldn't be able to do that in person. But there is something we do, our post-fellowship time that we used to do in person called snack time after worship. We do it online on Zoom. We see everybody and what they're snacking on. And I always try to engage him as much as possible because he and his mom are on. And that engagement has turned into, the past couple of Sundays, him getting on the computer himself and saying, hey, and having conversations with the entire community. And it's really amazing to see. And then finding points of connection with him so that he can see that some of the things that he might deal with and struggle with, particularly in terms of anxiety, I've been there too. And it's really opened up a new door for us. So I want to say that definitely, I said this before, for those who were engaging in real time, that do what you can where you are. And then keep in mind that there are some low hanging fruit, like Jill mentioned. I have some greeting cards that I got from Illustrated Ministry, which I'm using for children to send out just to check in and see how they're doing. And I realize now I need to do that for the teenagers too, because why not? I think they'd love to hear from me in a different way, and just to have something to hold on to and say, oh, this is so cool. You know, my youth minister sent this, as well as, for those who can use that, can leverage this in their budget. If you have the capacity, if you're doing things online, always provide captioning. If you need to use sign language interpreter, do that. But like I mentioned, one of the teenagers is deaf. And when we're in small group settings, we're watching videos or listening to podcasts, I always have captions there or a transcript. And then when we're engaging in questions, I have the entire group wait, and one of his brothers will sign, and they'll go back and forth so that he gets an opportunity to engage in the conversation as well. Just really learning to like slow down in order to go forward, right? In order to provide true inclusivity and accessibility to everyone, slowing down to think about what are those basic things that we could be doing to make this more accessible.
I just want to add one thought, something that we're about to implement. And that is inviting the young people into the work themselves. So yeah, we gather by Zoom, or some of us can gather in person, but we're going to pair up some of our older leaders with some of the other folks and invite them to be in relationship, kind of in a one-on-one way. Just as good faith expression, and looking out after each other. This group that I get to work with, they're so wonderful, and so let's invite them into caring for each other also, especially for our more introverted folks, or folks that maybe in person is too anxiety inducing or whatever. So that's something, that's an idea that came up that we'll be doing.
That's incredible. So there's like so many different things happening right now. Those of you who are with us live will know that the chat is exploding with resource sharing. My dog is participating in the conversation. I'm delighted, because part of what we had hoped for in the midst of this conversation is that we were creating a space of connection and ongoing relationship. I want to talk about, I want to invite a conversation about how do we, as people who are supporting youth and young adults, particularly youth within the United Church of Christ, connect with each other to continue this resource sharing, to continue these conversations in ways that really underline that place of like, you are not alone. You do not have to do this by yourself. You don't have to recreate the wheel every youth group meeting, that there are resources and programs and people, and like, breathe, beloved of God. Somebody else already died for this, and it's not us. It's not us. So there are so many places. I'm gonna before passing to Trayce, I want to also name that so much of our conversation about inclusion of people with disabilities, and exactly what Todd just said, falls under the disability justice tenet of nothing about us without us. And that's true in terms of this youth ministry too, as we're listening carefully to the ideas that are coming up from those we serve, and adjusting along the way. So to Trayce, how do we continue this conversation? Where do we go from here?
Yes, the chat has definitely been jumping, and I'm trying to copy and paste the certain things that we can continue to highlight. But one of the easiest ways is for those that are on Facebook, we have a UCC Youth Ministers Facebook page where some of these questions are already being posed of how are you doing social distancing meetings, and what does confirmation look like in a COVID reality? So I'm going to put the link in there again, but I definitely want to invite all who are able to go ahead and join so that you can continue the conversation at any time. Additionally, we also have an exciting opportunity scheduled for November 12th through 14th, which is next.
Wait. Get your calendars. This is going to be good.
Yes. So one of the things that I know is that the last time there was a dedicated conference for those that were doing youth ministry in any kind of context from the United Church of Christ was in the spring of 2010. So we were intentional about offering it. So November 12th to the 14th, we're going to have Reset for Renewal. All the information will be in the follow-up emails that come out. It will be posted on the Facebook page, KYP, all of those things. So like Chris said, go ahead, save the dates, and more information is coming.
There's going to be a lot more information of that coming. If you are in any of those Facebook groups, if you are in the network of UCC Youth Ministers, any or all of the above. And the purpose of that conference is really underscoring what Trayce said, to like start, just as we did in this conversation, start with, how are you doing? You who are carrying so much right now, how are you doing? How can we support each other, and how can we go forward with intentionality for the care of the people we serve? So that's exciting and upcoming. What other connection points are there? Or what have you found, those of you who are also in this conversation?
Well, the young folks are on TikTok, Instagram, and probably 20 other social media platforms that I don't even know about. I'm just really getting into Instagram, and one thing that I have appreciated is there's an account called Black Education Matters, and it's by a teacher, a Black woman teacher, queer teacher, who has, when I tell you, the most tremendous slide decks, books, curriculum, anything that you might want to incorporate, particularly as you're talking about racism and anti-racism with your young folks. I encourage you to follow that account. And I think the website, so the account is Black_education_matters. And then the website is blackeducationmattersresources.org.
Thank you so much. So as we, I want to go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, just as a way to connect and further the conversation, the Youth Ministry Institute at Yale is putting out, we have monthly webinars on Wednesdays. It's usually the first Wednesday of the month, although the next one is next week, the second Wednesday of the month. And next week, we're featuring Jana Scott, and Jana worked with the Obama administration around health and public policy, specifically with resilience in young people, and did that work in some pretty interesting areas around the country and in the aftermath of some of the shootings that young people have unfortunately been exposed to. So that would be an interesting place to continue this conversation. And I think it went up in the chat somewhere along the way. In December, we're talking about virtual mission trips. I think someone had a question in that rolling chat there about that. So finding ways to continue to connect and swap resources is so hugely important to remember that we are not in this alone, folks. We're doing it together.
So we will see you at the Reset for Renewal conference. And we are so excited that we will continue this conversation, connection, resource sharing, and like emotional, spiritual support in the midst of what has been a chaotic and ongoing year. I'm going to invite each of the panelists to offer some closing thoughts, words, and that particularly oriented towards words of encouragement for those who are watching, because I know that there is a word somebody watching needs to hear that you have that will help us collectively carry the message of the liberating love of gospel from this world into the next, from this generation into the next, and the next beyond that. So starting with Leea.
I think that my word would just be to take time for yourself, to connect and reconnect, to commune with spirit, to commune with the divine, and lean on all of the different tools and people and resources that you can to make sure that you are doing that. That's when you are at your best, and that's when you're able to really do fruitful work for the kingdom. That is first priority, is develop whatever that spiritual practice is for you. If you aren't doing it, slow down and pause and figure out what it is. If you haven't done it in a while, come back home to it. I promise it will bless you.
Early on, and this dovetails with what Reverend Leea was just saying, early on in my ministry, I started out as a hospital chaplain. And those of you who have been through CPE are probably familiar with the action, reflection, action model, where you go out, you do the work, and then you have to step back and take time to reflect on that, to tend to yourself, to tend to what God is speaking to you about, and to really listen to that. Mark 1 talks about Jesus doing the same. He was healing all of the people around him, but in the morning he got up and went off by himself. And then when the disciples came to find him again, he says, the disciples say to him, everyone is looking for you. And he says, no, let's go over there. And he knew that that was where he was being called to go next, because he took the time to step back and reflect and be with himself and to be with God. So I would offer a blessing for all of you as you continue to do this work, that it can feel a lot like action, 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 but the invitation that Jesus gives us is to do the action reflection so that we can then go act with intentionality and with hope and with purpose. A blessing to all of you who are doing this.
So when our children were born, I got to tell you, I had no clue what I was doing. And as they grew up and became teenagers, I became actually more clueless. When we blended a family, 2 sons and 2 sons, and I became a stepfather, again, what is this? I've just spent the past week with my sons and their families and their children. And I'm reminded that I did know enough, and I learned enough, and I was given enough. And they're in the same situation. You know, we've got a preteen and a 5-year-old and a toddler and an infant. You know, we had all, trying to get the grandpa picture was a disaster and the best picture ever. Anyway, I'm saying all of that to say, those of us companioning these young people, we have it. We have what we need. We've been given, we've been prepared, not specifically for this, but exactly for this moment. And I'm just so assured that in those moments where I'm not sure what to do, that I've got this community around me of people doing this work, and that if I'll just be still long enough, I'll be given what I need to get us through together. So I hope that's an encouragement to all of you, even as I'm experiencing so much joy and encouragement from the chat and the folks that I'm in this Zoom with. So yeah, blessings to everyone. Thank you. And I'd be glad to share a picture of my grandkids if you'd like to see it.
Mine was very similar to Todd's, and I want you all to know that you are enough. The God who called you in the midst of whatever condition you were is still faithful to see you in the midst of this pandemic and this election cycle and this next whatever it is, and that you are not doing this work alone. You are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, other faithful ministers, volunteers, national staffers, and people you will never know who pray for you, who walk with you, and who are here to serve as a resource for you. So you are enough, and you are never alone on this journey, in this work that God has called all of us to.
I'm feeling all of my heartstrings resonating with the conversations that we're having and the words that all 4 of you have offered. And if you are resonating with this work, and if this is a conversation that has mattered to you, please consider donating to the annual fund of the UCC, which supports conversations like this and work like Trayce's and mine by texting UCC to 41444 into the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. I also want to let you know, as you're preparing for stewardship campaigns this fall, you can consider using the Beloved Love materials from the United Church of Christ, because as we know, stewardship is part of this work to continue the work we do. And this language draws on the 3 great loves and roots stewardship and the core values of the United Church of Christ. And finally, I want to let you know that there's some amazing upcoming webinars. The first on Thursday, 2 days from now, is Theological Reflections by the UCC Hector Lopez Scholars, which is going to be incredible. The conversation in preparation has already moved me, and I know that you will be in for a treat on Thursday. Next week on Tuesday, we're going to be looking at what is the doctrine of discovery and what is the implication for our congregations in right relationship and covenant with First Nations people and beyond. So that will be incredibly important, and you can join us. And finally, a week from Thursday, we're going to be talking about embodied faith with bodies, sexuality, and relationships. So those of you doing youth ministry, that one's going to be beautiful. But it's not only going to be for youth. I know for a fact that we're going to talk about embodiment across the whole of our lives. And the folks leading that are going to be incredible. So having said all that, and in awareness of all that is and all that will be, may I please ask you, Reverend Jill, to pray us into the rest of our day?
I'd be honored to. Folks, let us be in a spirit of prayer. Let us breathe in And breathe out. Holy God, we know that you are breath. We know that you are the breath of life that hovered over the waters at creation, and the breath of life that created us to also be alive, to be infused with that breath. Breath is a funny thing these days as we talk about airborne illnesses, as we remember people who say, I can't breathe. I ask that you hold us all close in this time and in the time to come, as we use our collective breath to be together, even if distanced, and to worship you, as we hold our breath so that we can listen to others around us, so we can listen to the young people you have entrusted to us. I ask that you help us to use our breath, to use our voice as we speak up against injustice and hatred. I ask that you help us pay attention to our breath as we tend to ourselves. Walk with us, Holy One, as we go from this place, granting us eyes to see, ears to hear, hands willing to work, and breath that sustains us and helps us journey forward. Thank you for each one of those gathered today, and thank you for their ministries. Please continue to allow your Holy Spirit breath to flow through all of us. It is in your holy name that we pray. Amen.